in a town where whispers roam. A wolf-turned man found a place called home. Sunlight streams through the window panes. A cozy bookstore where magic reigns. Pages turn with every heart's desire, filling the air with tales that inspire. By day it's quiet, the world feels still, but as dusk falls, it's time for the thrill. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with laughter and cheer. In the heart of the stories we hold our dear. Games on the table, love and delight. In this little bookstore, everything's right. He weaves the stories of distant lands, with creatures that play in the palm of his hands. The whispers of legends fill the room. From dragons to dreamers, the shadows bloom. In the laughter we forget our fears, sharing our hopes, the dreams of our years. The flicker of candles, the warm glow inside. In the embrace of tales, we let love guide. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with laughter and cheer. In the heart of the stories we hold our dear. Games on the table, love and delight. In this little bookstore, everything's right. We dive into...
Of course, I cough as soon as I unmute the microphone. Hey, Guilty. Welcome in. Congrats on getting first. White Earp retired and passed away at 80. Well, I guess that's when we do it. Notice, there's cats. Cats on the cat cam. Nice of them to acknowledge they have a bed there again. But anyway, it's Thursday. And, well, I'm going to be reading a book that's technically 300 years old. Well, about 330. But it wasn't officially printed until 1893, so yeah. And I have it listed as nonfiction because it is in fact a research book. That's the crazy thing. Not only is it a research book, but it's a research book written by a minister. Hey, Nerdy! Congrats on second. get over to the study. No, it's this book. I have a copy of it. For some reason, my model is not centered again. Oh well. It's always interesting when I can find books on folklore and magic written by ministers. I mean, they traveled the area and collected the stories and got as much information as they could. Admittedly, this book isn't nearly as in-depth as the Book of Werewolves by Sabine Baron Gold. This one is also tied into my fairy tales because it was commented on and published by Andrew Lang, who, if you've been here for my Friday fairy tales, I've read 10 of his fairy tale collection so far, and I'm going to start number 11 tomorrow. And then I'll try to get into his other books, but still. That's it. This is collected and treated as fact, which honestly I think it's cool. And I knew about the book, but I didn't know that it was doing a reprint. In fact, I didn't think about it until Kenny Boyle mentioned it, who has a tendency to explain Scottish folklore, and just like short clips on YouTube and Instagram. But he mentioned the Secret Commonwealth, and then for some reason it popped up on one of my other sources, because everything on the internet is connected. So I thought I would find a copy. And amazingly, I did. I think I got it for maybe $15. But that's also because I get a bookseller discount. So I will, of course, put a link to this book in the VODs if you want to go to Grey Wolf and get a copy. I don't think I've ever gotten any pay from any of my affiliates, but it would be nice to still kind of push sales towards where people want to buy these books. In fact, I think every book that I've read, if it is still in existence, I have a link for it on the Grey Wolf Rare and Magical Books set up on bookshop.org. If not, I will find it for you. Because I really do get into the whole selling in books, so. I'm going to read all of this book, so the introduction and everything else. Of course, I'm not sure what psychical means, but just the title of the book is The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies, a study in folklore and physical research. The text by Robert Kirk, M.A., minister of Aberfoyle in 1691. Commentary by Andrew Lang in 1893. And Andrew Lang put in the dedication. So. Dedication to Robert Louis Stevenson. Oh, Louis, you that like the mast, you're far fra Kelpie, wraith and geist, a fairy dams, no unco chest, and haunted cell. Among a heathen clan your place, that kins na bell. Ye hae the heather, peat nor birks, tear truth in your burnies lurks. There are nae bonny UP Kirks, an awful place. Nae kens the covenant of works frae that of grace. But whiles maybe to them you'll read bloods o' covenanting creed, whilst their pagan whams you'll feed on wholesome patrich, and you'll sing and seen you'll gar the learnest greed o' the shorter charich. Yet ye uncovenanted shavers, I rove the essay, o clash of clavers, o gods and etons, auld wives olivers, but their delight, the voice o' him that tells them quavers, just with fair fright. And ye may not tell, I yont ye fame, thy Highland chasses of your name. To speak the truth, I make a shame, to the truth, to half believe them, and stamped with Tillatusa's name, till I receive them. And folk to come ayont the sea may hear the yowl of the banshee, and frae the water kelpie flee ere a thing cease, and island bairns may stolen be by the folk of peace. Salty. Faith may they steal me with my will, and kindled I only Fairy Hill. I'd lay me down there, snod and still, and the land to win. For man, I've macely had my fill o' this world's den. Really fun reading Scotch Gaelic. Which, of course, is what Auld Lang Syne is written in. So, okay. We have the Fairy Minister, in memory of the Reverend Kirk, who went to his own herd and entered into the land of the people peace, in the year of grace 1692, and of his age 52. People of peace, a peaceful man, well worthy of your love was he, who, while the roaring Garry ran, red with the lifeblood of Dundee. While coats were turning, crowds were falling, wandering along his valley still, and heard your mystic voices calling from Fairy Knowe and Haunted Hill. He heard, he saw, he knew too well the secrets of your fairy clan. You stole him from the haunted dell, who never more was seen of man. Now far from heaven, and safe from hell, unknown of earth, he wanders free. Would that he might return and tell all his mysterious company. For we have tried the peace of the folk of peace. No more they tax our corn oil. Their dances on the moorland cease, the brownie stints his wonted toil. No more shall any shepherd meet the ladies of the fairy clan, nor are their deathly kisses sweet on the lips of any earthly man. And half I envy him who know, clothed in her courts enchanted green, by moonlit lochs or mountains grow, is chaplain to the Fairy Queen. And there's a wild dweeble. Dweebelin. 2 poems to even start the book. Okay, so here we go. Kirk's Secret Commonwealth. Introduction. The history of the book and author. The bibliography of this following little tract is extremely obscure. The title page of the edition is 1815, which we reproduce, gives a date of 1691. Sir Walter Scott says in his Demonology and Witchcraft, 1830, page 163, a note, it was printed with the author's name in 1691 and reprinted in 1815 for Longman & Co. But was there really a printed edition in 1691? Scott says that he never met with an example. Research in our great libraries has discovered none, and there is none save that of the 1815 at Aberfoyle. The reprint of 100 copies was made, as it states, from no printed text, but from a manuscript copy preserved in the Advocate's Library. On page 54 of the edition of 1815, at the end of the comments on Lord Tarbot's letters, there is a note by the transcriber, that is, the person who wrote the manuscript of the Advocate's Library. See the rest in a little manuscript belonging to Colin Cork. Now, Colin Cork, writer of the signet, was the son of the Reverend Mr. Kirk, author of the tract. If the son had his father's book only in manuscript, it seems very probable that it was not printed in 1691, that the title page is only a title page of the manuscript. Though some printed text of 1691 is discovered, we may doubt then whether the 100 copies published in 1815, and are now somewhat rare, be not the original printed edition. The editor has a copy of the 1815, but is the only one which he has met with for sale. The Reverend Robert Kirk, the author of the Secret Commonwealth, was a student of theology at St. Andrews. His master's degree, however, he took at Edinburgh. He was, and this is notable, the youngest and seventh son of Mr. James Kirk, minister of Aberfoyle, a place familiar to all readers of Rob Roy. As a seventh son, he was, no doubt, specially gifted, and in the Secret Commonwealth he lays some stress on the mystic privileges of such birth. There may be some secret virtue in the womb of the parent which increaseth until the seventh son have be born, and decreaseth by the same degree afterwards. It would not surprise us if Mr. Kirk, no less than the Reverend Robert Blair of St. Andrews, from 1650 to 1660, could heal a scrofula by the touch, like royal persons Charles III, in Italy, for example. As is known to all, the House of Brunswick has no such powers. However, this may have been, Mr. Kirk was probably drawn, by his seventh sonship, to a more careful study of physical phenomena than most of his brethren bestowed. Little is known of his life. He was minister originally in Belquidder, whence in 1685 he was transferred to Aberfoyle. This was no covenanting district, as there was no bigotry in Mr. Kirk's dissertation. He was employed on an Irish translation of the Bible, and he published the Folklore in Gaelic in 1684. He married first Isabel, daughter of Sir Colin Campbell of Manchester, who died in 1680, and secondly the daughter of Campbell of Forty. This lady survived him. From his connection with Campbells we may misdoubt him for a Whig, but his first wife he had a son, Colin Kirk, W.S. By his second wife a son who was minister of Dornoch. He died, if he did die, which is disputed, in 1692, aged about 51. His tomb was inscribed, Robertus Kirk, A.M., Lingue Hiberniae Lumen. The tomb, in Scott's time, was to be seen in the east end of the churchyard of Aberfoyle, but the ashes of Mr. Kirk are not there. His successor, the Reverend Dr. Graham, in the Sketches of the Picturesque Scenery, informs us that Mr. Kirk was walking on a Dunshee, or fairy hill, in his neighborhood, and he sunk down in a swoon, which was taken for death. After the ceremony of the seeming funeral, writes Scott, op-ed, page 105, the form of Reverend Robert Kirk appeared in the relation and commanded him to go to Graham of Duttray. Say to Duttray, who is my cousin as well as your own, that I am not dead, but a captive in fairyland, and only one chance remains for my liberation. When the posthumous child, of which my wife has been delivered since my disappearance, shall be brought to baptism, I will appear in the room, when, if Duttray shall throw over my head the knife or dirk which he holds in his hand, I may be restored to society. But if this is neglected, I am lost forever. True to his tryst, Mr. Kirk did appear at the christening, and was visibly seen. But Duttray was so astonished that he did not throw his dirk over the head of the appearance, and to society Mr. Kirk was not yet restored. This extremely is to be regretted, as he could now add matter of such importance to his treatise. Neither history nor tradition has more to tell about Mr. Robert Kirk, who seems to have been a man of good family, a student, and, as his book shows, an innocent and learned person. 2. The Secret Commonwealth. The tract of which the reader now knows the history is a little volume of somewhat singular character. Written in 1691 by the Reverend Robert Kirk, minister of Aberfoyle, it is a kind of metaphysic of the fairy world. Having lived through the period of the sufferings of the Kirk, the author might have been expected either to neglect fairyland altogether, or to regard it as a mere appendage of Satan's kingdom. A burning question, indeed, for some of the witches who suffered at Presbyterian hands were merely narrators of popular tales about the state of the dead. That she trafficked with the dead, and from a ghost won a medical recipe as the cure of the Archbishop Adamson at St. Andrews, was the charge against Alison Persons. The bishop carpets his castle like a toad in his hole, sick of a disease of great fidelity, and of me under the care of a woman suspended of witchcraft, namely, in what confesseth sir as high learned medicine, and I call it Mr. Williamson's Summon, that appeared divers times to hereafter his death, and gave here a book. She was excut in Edinburgh as a witch. James Melville's Diary, page 137, 1583. The archbishop, like other witches, had a familiar in the form of a hare, which once ran before him down the street. These were the beliefs of men of learning like James, the nephew and companion of Andrew Melville. Even in our author's own time, Archbishop Sharp was accused of entertaining the muckle black devil in his study at midnight, and being levitated and dancing in the air. This last feat, credible to a saint of a Neoplatonist like Plotinus, was reckoned for a sin to Archbishop Sharp, as may be read in Wodrow's Analecta. Thus all fairydom was commonly looked on as under the same guilt as witchcraft. Yet Mr. Kirk of Aberfoyle, living among Celtic people, treats the land of fairy as mere fact in nature, a world with its own laws, which he investigates without fear of accuser of the brethren. We may thus regard him, even more than Wodrow, as an early student in folklore and in physical research, topics which run into each other, and he shows nothing of the usual persecuting disposition. Nor, again, is Mr. Kirk like Glanville and Henry Moore. He does not, save in his title page and one brief passage, make superstitious creeds or physical phenomena into arguments and proofs against modern Sadducees. Firm in his belief, he treats this matter with a scientific spirit, as if he were dealing with a generally recognized physical phenomena. Our study of Mr. Kirk's little tractate must have a double aspect. It must be an essay partly on folklore, on popular beliefs and the relation to the similar beliefs in other parts of the world, and the residuum of fact, preserved by tradition, which they may contain. On the other hand, as mental phenomena are in question, such things are premonitions, hallucinations, abnormal or unusual experiences, generally a criticism of Mr. Kirk, must verge on psychical research. The society organized for that difficult subject certainly takes a vast deal of trouble about all manner of odd reports and strange visions. It transfers thoughts to no value, and at a great expense of time of the serious hard work. But as far as the writer has read the Society's proceedings, it takes no keep, as Mallory says, of these affairs in their historical aspect. Whatever hallucination or illusion or impostures or the subliminal self can do today has always been done among peoples in every degree of civilizations. A historical study on the topic, as contained in Trials of Witchcraft and the reports of travelers and missionaries and the works of the 17th century Platonists, more Galvin Sinclair and others, and in these rare tracks such as The Devil in the Glen Loose and The Just Devil of Woodstock, not to mention Lavater, Wyries, Tharis, Reginald Scott, and so on, as is necessary to the psychologist as to the folklorist. If there be an element of fact in modern hypnotic experiments, a matter on which I have really no opinion, it is plain that old magic and witchcraft are not mere illusions, or not commonplace illusions. The subliminal self has a stroke in these affairs. Assuredly, the psychologists would have a historical department. The evidence which they would find is, of course, vitiated in many obvious ways, but the evidence contains much that coincides with that of modern times, and the coincidence can hardly be designed. That is to say, the old Highland seers had no design on an abating modern inquiry. It may be, however, that their methods and ideas have been traditionally handed down to modern sensitives and mediums. At all events, here is a historical chapter, if it is but a chapter in the history of human error. These wide and multifarious topics can only be touched on lightly in this essay. The author will be content if he directs the attention of students with more leisure and a better library of diversity in the matter. But first, we glance at the Secret Commonwealth as folklorists. Page. Three. The subterranean inhabitants. Hi, Dusk. Mr. Kirk's first chapter of the subterranean inhabitants naturally suggests the recent speculation of Mr. McRitchie. The gist of Mr. McRitchie's testimony of tradition is that there was once a race of earth dwellers in this island, that their artificial caves still exist, that their people survive in popular memory as the legendary fiends, and as the pecks of popular tales in which they are regarded as dwarves. The pecks were uncouth wee bodies, but terrible strength. Here, then, it might be thought that we have the origin of fairy beliefs. There really was, on this showing, a dwarf race, who actually did live in the fairy hills or howes, now commonly looked at as sepulchral monuments. Okay. Quick pause here. Can anyone else think of a story in which short people are called pets? It makes me wonder if it was spelled that way in the script for it, because it is Pechts. No. A little bit more modern. Would you believe Willow? Mad Merrigan and all the other people refer to Willow and his friends as Pecks. Of course, Pecks live underground. Pecks. So hobbits would technically be Pecks. Pecks. Now it's interesting that it actually mentions it. Well, have you read the book Willow? I actually have, but I don't remember seeing it there either. But the fact it says it's a dwarf race who live in fairy hills. So, Hobbit Hills. So a hobbit would be a peck. Interesting thought. Interesting. Anyway, as there is much in Mr. McRetchie's theory which does not commend itself to me. The modern legends of Apex, as builders of Glasgow Cathedral, for example, do not appear to prove such a late survival as the race of Picts. But on a level of the old Greek belief that Cyclops built Messene, Testimony of Tradition, page 73. Granting for the sake of discussion that there were still Picts or Pecks in Galloway when Glasgow Cathedral was built in the 12th century, these wild Galloway men, scourges of the English border, were the very last people to be employed as masons. The truth is that the recent Scotch have entirely forgotten the ages of medieval art. Accustomed to the ill-built barns of a robbed and stinted Kirk, they looked on the cathedral as no work of ordinary beings. It was a creation of the Pecks, or Messene, or the Tyrants of the mighty walls were creations of Cyclops. By another coincidence, the well-known story of the last Peck, who refuses to divulge the secret of the Heather Ale, is told by Volksana Saga, and in the Nibelungenlied of the last Niflheim. Again, the breaking of a bar of iron, which he takes for a human arm, by the last Peck is a current tale of the Dracos in modern Greece. See chapters Popular Traditions of Scotland for the last Peck. I cannot believe that historical Picts were set to half-naked dwarvish savages, hairy men living underground. These are the topics of Sir Arthur Walder's and Monkbarns. Mr. W. F. Skene may be said to have put the historic Picts in their proper places as the ancestors of the Highlanders. The Peck of the legend answers the Dracos and the Cyclops. The beliefs about his habits may be suggested by the Tamoi, still more by the Brochs. It seems less probable that they represent the historical memory, as the Irish fiends. The topic can only be discussed by Celtic scholars. But it does not follow, because the leader of the fiends seemed a dwarf among giants, that therefore his people were a dwarvish race. The theory proves no more than Gulliver's Travels. Once more, we often read the sagas of hero like Grettir, who opens a howe, has a conflict with the borrow-right, as Mr. Morris calls the hoe-dweller, and wins gold and weapons. But the dweller of the howe is often merely an able-bodied ghost of a Norseman, known and named character who is buried there. He is not a Peck. Thus, as it seems to me, the Scotch and the Celts possess a theory of legendary people, as did the Greeks. Whether any factual traditions of an earlier, perhaps Finnish race was at the bottom of the legend is an obscure question. But having such a belief, the Scotch easily discovered homes for fancied people in the Sulptero house. They combined their information. The fairies, again, are composite creatures. As they came to births and christenings, and as Norse wise wives, in the Saga of Eric the Red, prophesied at festivals, Mr. McRitchie combines his own information. The wise wife is a fen woman, and fen and fairy amalgamate. But the Egyptians, as in the tale of two brothers, Mr. O. Contes Egyptianus, had their Hathors who came and prophesied their births. The Greeks in their Messene, and the story of Meleager and the burning brand. The Hathors and Moirae play, in ancient Egypt and in ancient Greece, the part of fairies at the christening, but surely they are not Finnish women. In short, though a memory of some old race may have mingled with the composite fairy belief, this is at most but an element in the whole, and the part played by ancestral spirits, naturally earth-dwellers, is probably more important. Bishop Calloway has pointed out in the preface to his Zulu tales that what the Highlanders say are fairies, the Zulus say of the ancestors. In many ways, as when persons carried off to fairyland to meet relations or friends lately deceased, they warn them, as Persephone and Steenie Singson were warned, to eat no food of this place. Fairyland is clearly a memory of the pre-Christian Hades. There are other elements of this complex mass of fairy tradition, but Chaucer knew the fairy queen Proserpina, as Champion calls her, and it's plain in the very fact that the dread Persephone and the queen over dead and the dead has dwindled into the lady who borrows Tamlin in the ballad. Indeed, Kirk mentions, but does not approve of this explanation, that those subterranean people are departed souls. Now, as was said, the dead are dwellers of under earth. The worshippers of Chthonian Demeter, Achea, beat the earth with wands. So does the Zulu sorcerer when he appeals to the ancestors. The MacDonald in Moidart, being pressed for his rent, beat the earth and cried aloud to his dead chief, "Simon, hear me, you are always good to me." 4. Hey, Matsu. Going through Andrew Lang's introduction to the book right now. Fairyland and Hades. Thus, to my mind at least, the subterranean inhabitants of Mr. Kirk's book are not so much a traditional collection of the real dwarfish race living underground, a hypothesis of Sir Walter Scott's, as a lingering memory of the Chthonian beings, the ancestors. A good case in point is that Bessie Dunlap of Delray, an ancestor, tried on the 8th of November, 1576, for witchcraft. She dealt in medicine and white magic, and obtained her prescriptions from Thomas Reed, slain at Pinkville fight, 1547, who often appeared to her and tried to lead her off to fairyland. She, like Alison Pearson, was convicted and burnt. Scott's Demonology, page 146, and Pitcairn's Criminal Trials. Both ladies knew the Fairy Queen, and Alison Pearson beheld Maitland of Lethington and Buckley of Fairyland, as is recounted by the rhymed satire of the Archbishop Adamson, and also Scottish Poems, page 321. These are excellent proofs that Fairyland was a kind of Hades, or home of the dead. Mr. Kirk, who speaks of the sly Mythe as confidently as if he were discussing the habits of the remote race which he had visited, credits them, as the Greek gods are credited, with the power of nourishing themselves on some fine essential part of human sacrifice or human food. Some fine spirituous liquors that pierce like air and oil, and the poison of substance of the corns and liquors. Others, more gross, steal the actual grain, as do crows and mice. They are heard hammering on the house, as brownies they enter houses and cleanse the hearths. They are the domovoys, in Russians call them. John Major, in his exposition of St. Matthew, 1518, 48, gives perhaps the oldest account of brownies in believing temper. Major styles of Farney or Brumby, they thrash as much grain in one night as 20 men could do. They throw stones whether among people sitting in fire. Whether they can predict the future events is doubtful. See Mr. Constable in Major's Greater Britain, page 30, Edinburgh, 1892. To us they seem too much remote from the Roman lyres, spirits of the household and of the hearth. In all these creatures Mr. Kirk recognizes an abstruse people, who were before a more substantial race, whose furrows are still to be seen in the hilltops. They never were, in his mind, plain palpable folk. They are only visible in their quarterly flittings to men of the second sight. That gift of vision includes not only power to see distant and future events, but the viewless forms of air. To shun these flittings, men visit church on the first Sunday of the quarter, Then they will be hallowed against elf shots, those arrows that fly in the dark. As is well known, superstition explained the Neolithic arrowheads as fairy weapons. It does not follow that the tradition of Neolithic people suggested the belief in fairies, but we cannot deny absolutely that some such memory of an early race, a shy and furtive people who used weapons of stone, may conceivably play its part in fairy legend. Thence Mr. Kirk glides into that singular theory of savage metaphysics which somewhat resembles Platonic doctrine of ideas. All things, in Red Indian belief, have somewhere their ideal counterpart, or father. Thus a donkey, when first seen, was regarded the father, or archetype, of the rabbits. Now the second-sighted people behold the double man, the doppelganger, astral body, wraith, or what you will, of a living person that is merely his counterpart in this abstruse world. The industry of the Psychical Society has collected much material, evidence, whatever its value, for the existence of the double man. We may call it a hallucination, which does not greatly increase our knowledge. From personal experience and the experience of friends, I am constrained to believe that we may think we see a person who is not really present to the view, and may be in the next room or downstairs or 100 miles off. This experience has occurred to the sane, the unimaginative, the healthy, the free from superstition, and in circumstances by no means mystic. For example, when a person supposed to be seen was not dying nor distressed, nor in any but the most normal condition. Indeed, the cases where this was nothing abnormal in the state of the person seen from far are numerous, in my personal knowledge, than those in which the person was dying or dead or excited. The reverse appears to be the rule in the experience of the Psychical Society. The actual proportion of coincidental and non-coincidental cases, after all deduction for possible sources of error, was in fact that the probability against the superstition of chance coincidence became enormous, on the assumption that ordinary occurrency on the part of the informants. Professor Sidgwick, Processor, SPR, Volume 8, page 607. Some 17,000 answers were collected. We must apparently accept these facts as not very abnormal, nor very unusual, and doubtless as capable of being some suggestive explanation. But when such things occurred among the unimaginative and uneducated Highlanders, they became foundations and proofs of the doctrine of second sight, proofs, too, of a primitive metaphysical doctrine of counterparts and correspondences. They have vouched that in every element and different state of being have animals resembling these in another element. By persons not knowing this, the Roman invention of guardian angel is particularly assigned. Has been promulgated. The guardian angel of the Roman superstition is merely a double or co-walker, the type in a viewless world, of the man in the apparent world. Thus are race and ghosts explained by our Presbyterian psychologists in this Highland flock. All things universally have their types, their reflex. A man's type or reflex, or co-walker, may be seen at a distance from him during his life. Nay, may be seen after his death. A gifted man of second sight can tell the substantial figure from the airy counterpart. Sometimes the reflex anticipates the action of the reality. Was often seen to enter the house, by which the people knew that the person of that likeness was to visit them in a few days. It may be occurred to most of us to meet a person in the street whom we took for an acquaintance. It is not he, but we met the real man a few paces farther on. Thus, a distinguished officer, at home with leave, met a friend, as he tells me, in Piccadilly. The other passed without notice. The officer hesitated about following him, did not, and at some 50 yards he met the man. There is probably no more in this than resemblance and coincidence, but this is a kind of thing which has worked into the Highlanders into their metaphysics. The end of the co-walker is obscure. This copy, echo, or living picture goes at least to his own herd. Thus ghosts are short-lived, and according to M. de Sarre of the Manners and Posthumous Man, the Homme Posthume, seldom survive more than for a century. By an airy being of this kind, the Highlanders explain the false and morbid appetites. A joint eater inhabited the patient. He feeds two when he eats. As a rule, fairies get their food as witches do. They take pith and milk from the neighbors' cows until they own cheese hold, throw a hair tether at a great distance by earth magic, only drawing a spigot fastened to a post, which will bring milk as far as the bowl be heard not to roar. This is illustrated in some drinking scene from Faust. This kind of charge is familiar in trials of witchcraft. In accordance to the whole metaphysics and the system of doubles, which are the parasites of humanity, and the superstitions of nurses stolen by fairies, and of children kidnapped while changelings are left in their place, the later accounts for sudden decline and loss of health by a child. He is not the original child, but a fairy brat. To guard against this, bread, as human food, is hateful to fairies, or so the Kanakas carried a boiled yam about at night, or the Bible, or iron which is placed at the bed of childbirth. Iron scares the spirits, said the Psychicalist, says the drawn sword as Odysseus and Hades. The fairy bride wails, vanishes on being touched with iron. This belief probably came in when iron was rare, new, and a mysterious metal. The mortal nurses in fairyland are pleasantly illustrated by the ballad. I heard a cow low, a bonny bonny cow low, in Secret Patrick Sharp's ballad book. This is part of the superstition that is not easy to elucidate. Kirk repeats the well-known tales of the blinding of the mortal who saw too clearly by making use of their ointments. Well-known examples obscure in the Garvis of Talbury and are cited in Scott's notes on Tamlin and the Border Minstrelsy. As Homer fables of the dead, their speech is kind of whistling like the cry of bats, another indication of a pre-Christian Hades. They have feasts and burials, and Pashley, in his travels in Crete, tells of the well-known border story of a man who was fired on a fairy bridal and heard the voice cry, "You have slain the bonny bridegroom." It is, of course, to be noted that the modern Greek superstition of the Nereids, who carry off mortal girls to dance with them until they pine away, answers some of our fairy legends, while it will hardly be maintained that the Nereids are a memory of the prehistoric Finns. Antic Corbanic jollity is a note of Nereids, as well as a sleigh myth. The inconvenience of the succubi, the fairy girls who make love to young men, is well known to the Breton island, the Suriname. The same superstition is current among the Kanakas of New Caledonia. My cousin, Mr. Atkinson, was visited by a young Kakana who twice or thrice returned to take leave of him with much emotion. When Mr. Atkinson asked what was the matter, the lad said that he had just met, as he thought, the girl of his heart in the forest. After a scene of dalliance, she vanished, and he knew that she was a forest fairy, and that he must die in 3 days, which he did. This is the inconvenience of their succubi, regretted by Mr. Kirk. Thus it appears to the mass these opinions is not local, nor Celtic merely, but a worldwide diffusion. Thus Sir Walter Scott observes in Afghans and Highlanders, their superstitions are the same, or nearly so. The Guli Bailakan, demons of the desert, resemble the Baltics of the Highlanders, who walk the heath at midnight under the moon. Quarterly Review, 14, page 289. Again, Mr. Kirk says that werewolves and witches, true bodies are, by the union of the spirit of nature that runs through all, echoing and doubling the blow towards another, wounded at home, when the ethereal or assumed bodies are stricken elsewhere. Thus, if a witch hare is shot, the witch's real body is hurt in the same place. And Lefetow, in North America, found that when a heron shot a witch bird, the real magician was stricken in the same place. The theory that the fairies appear as a little rough dog is illustrated by the Welsh Dogs of Hell in Blackwood's magazine for 1818 contains many examples of these hell dogs, which are often invested in a sheet of fire, as Rink says in the case of among the Eskimo. Take a modern instance. Mr. F.A. Powing friend, walking back at night on the lonely road, see a large black dog rise from it, slowly walk to the side, and disappear. They search in vain, and Mr. Poway subsequently hearing that the mysterious dog is the terror of the neighborhood, but no such real dog is known. Date, summer 1873. Journal of SPR, February 1893, page 31. The dwellings of these airy shadows of mankind are naturally fairy hills. There is such a hill, the fairy hill at Aberfoyle, where Mr. Kirk resided. Finally, Nicole Javy describes its legend in an admirable passage in Rob Roy. Mr. McRitchie says, "How much of this how is artificial, and whether it is of any, remains to be discovered. It is much larger than most artificial tumuli. According to Mr. Kirk and the Highlanders, superstitiously believe the souls of their predecessors to dwell in the fairy hills, and for that end, they say, the motte or mount was delicate beside every churchyard, to receive the souls till their adjacent bodies arise, and so become as a fairy hill." Here the Highland philosophers conspicuously put the cart before the horse. The tumuli are much older than the churches, which were no doubt built beside them because the place was a sacred character. Two very good examples may be seen in Dalry on the Keen, and Galloway, and at Parton on Loch Keen. The grassy houses are large and symmetrical, and the modern Presbyterian churches occupy old sites. At Parton there are ruins of an ancient Catholic church. Round the tumultuous at Dalry, according to the local form of the Martian of Harrison, a great dragon used to coil in triple folds before it was killed by a blacksmith. Nobody, perhaps, can regard these tumuli, and as many of them as anything is sepulchral. On the road between Ballinsay in Ayrshire and Stranraer, there is a beautiful tumulus above the sea, which at once recalls the barrow above the main at Ploughnir in the Odyssey, asked Odysseus to build for him. The memorial of the luckless man. In the Argonautica of Apollonius Rhodus, the ghost of a hero who fell at Troy appears to be adventures like a tumultuous like this one in the Ayrshire coast. And speaking of these barrows, Mr. Kirk tells how, during a famine about 1676, two women had a vision of a treasure hid in the fairy hills. This they excavated and discovered some coins of good money. The great gold corselet of the British Museum is said to have been found in Wales, where tradition spoke of a ghost in golden armor which haunted a hillock. The hillock was excavated, and the gold corselet, like the Shakespearean bricks, is alive to testify to the truth of the story. 5. Fairies and Psychical Research. The fairy belief, we have said, is a composite thing, and the material is given by tradition such as a memory, perhaps of a prehistoric race by an old religion, and in the thoughts of the pre-Christian Hades, poetry, fancy have been at work. Consumption, lingering disease, unexplained disappearances, and sudden deaths have been accounted for by the agency of the fairies, or people of peace. If the superstitions included no more than this, we might regard it as a natural result of imagination, dealing with the facts quite natural in the ordinary course of things. But there are elements in the belief which cannot be so easily dismissed. We must ask whether the abnormal phenomena which have been so frequently discussed, fought over, forgotten, and revived, do not enter the general mass of folklore. They appear most notably in the two branches of browniedom, of pixies, as they say in Devonshire, who haunt the house, and in the alleged examples of the second sight. The former topic is the more obscure, if not the more curious. Let us examine the occurrences, then, which may have begotten the belief of brownies, and that house-haunting pixies are fairies. These appearances may be alleged, on one hand, to be actual facts of nature, and the workings of some yet unexplained forces, or they may merely be the consequences of some very old traditional methods of imposture, vulgar in itself, but still historical. That form of imposture, again, may be wrought either by conscious agents or unconsciously and automatically by persons under the influence of somnambulism. Or, finally, the phenomenon may be various cases be due to one of the three agencies, of all which may possibly be various cause, as consciously imposture and trickery in certain and vera causa. In Mr. Kirk's book we meet the invisible wights of the haunt houses, and throw great stones, pieces of earth and wood, and the inhabitants, but hurt them not at all. As we have said, Major, 1518, Halsey writes Fauni or Brobni, that is, brownies, and says that they thrash as much grain as one night as 20 men could do, and throw stones about. The legend of their working was common in Scotland, and the correspondence at Devonshire the belief of pixies who set the house in order exists among the grandparents of the present generation. But the sportive is more common than the kindly aspect of brownies. Through history we consistently find them causing objects to move without visible contact, and acting in sport like buffoons and trolls. In his Letters on Demonology, page 377, Scott gives instances where the buffoon or troll was detected, and confessed that the rattlings of plates and movements of objects were caused by an apparatus of threads and horsehair. He also quotes the famous doings of the just devil Woodstock in 1649, which so perplexed and discomfited the Cromwellian commissioners. He accounts for the annoyances of confessions of Joe Collins of Oxford. Funny Joe, while he quotes from Hone's everyday book, while Hone quotes from the British Magazine of 1747. But the writer in the British Magazine gives no references or authorities of the authenticity of Funny Joe's confessions, nor even of the existence of Joseph. Scott could not find his original on the pamphlets of the British Museum, and some of the statements attributed to Joe could not tally to the official account and other contemporary documents collected in Sir Walter's Woodstock. Joe pretends, for example, to have been secretary to the commission under the name of Giles Sharp, but in the other accounts his secretary is named Brown. The royalist brownie, or poltergeist, lies under shrewd suspicion, but Joe's own existence is unproved, and his alleged evidence is of no value. However, no sane person can dream of doubting that many a brownie has been as much flesh and blood as a brownie of Bedson and Hogg's story. There remains the less easily explicable tales of strange and humorous disturbances, accompanied by loud sounds, rappings, and moving of objects without any visible contact, and so forth. Perhaps we may best examine these by taking modern instances collected by the Psychical Society in the first place, and then comparing them to the cases recorded at distant times and remote places. Some curious common features will be observed, and the evidence has at least the value of undesigned coincidence. Glanville Telfar, minister of rhetoric, and the Wesleys, Dr. Adam Clark, and Priest Mather were not modern students of physical research. The modern psychical researchers, we fear, are not students of the old legendary lore, which they dismiss on evidence not first-handed or scientifically valid. Thus, they do not seem to be aware that they're describing almost identical terms, phenomena identical with the notes of Telfar, Mather, Lavatar, and the rest, by those ancients attributed to devils. The modern recorders are not consciously copying from the old accounts. The coincidences, therefore, have value as proving that certain phenomena have occurred and recurred. Now, those phenomena may be due to conscious or to hysterical imposture, but they have been frequent and common enough to keep alive, and probably originate the part of the fairy belief, that part which concerned the brownies and the house-haunting pixies of draw movies. These again correspond to the tricky beings described by Mr. Leland in the Etruscan remains as survivals of the Roman and Etruscan popular beliefs. We find similar occurrences in the empire of the Incas, not long after the Spanish conquered Peru. Okay, I'm gonna have to go to break. I did warn people at the beginning of this book it was written as research documentary. So I will see you in a few. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break. So what do you think? We've done almost an hour, and we're still on Andrew Lang's introduction. I'll probably have to cut it up into chapters too, because it's done in segments. Anyway. Beginning then with what the nearest to us Once again. So separated. Okay. Beginning then with what is nearest to us in the times, we take Mr. F. W. H. Myers' essays on alleged movement of objects without contact, occurring not in the presence of a paid medium. The alleged phenomena are, of course, as common as blackberries in the presence of paid mediums, but are to the last degree untrustworthy. Even when there is no paid medium present, the mere contagious excitement which is said to have been developed at seances makes all as though to occur there was a story to be taken with plenty of salt. One of Mr. Myers' examples was the result of seances, but it had features of great importance for this argument. It will be found in SPR Volume 19, page 189, July 1891. The performers are Mr. C, Mrs. C, and Mr. H. Mr. C and Mrs. C are spoken of as good witnesses, known to Mr. Myers and Professor Barrett. Mr. H.'s health has suffered so much that he cannot be examined, and Mr. H. is a person who interests us here for reasons which will be given later. All three were unbelievers in these matters. On the second evening, lights floated about the room, which was lit, apparently, by a full moon. F., who is also H., felt cold hands touching, and hands recur in old pre-scientific accounts. The three majors were holding hands tightly at the time. Now, Mr. H. had hitherto been in excellent health, but after his chair was dragged from under him and he was thrown down on the ground, he went into a trance. His watch and ring, on the middle of his hand held by Mrs. C, were carried to a remote part of the room. H. leaves the circle and sits at the window. Another figure walks through the room. H. returns and is thrown down. His coat is dragged off, and his boots are discovered on a distant sofa. He asks for something from home and goes into a trance. A photograph locked up by him at home is found on the table. His wife, in town, being quite ignorant of our having seances, told us that at the very hour a fearful crash occurred in his bedroom. The photograph vanished and returned last night when H. was in the trance. He is thrown down again. He has alternate fits of unconsciousness and raving delirium. The home of Mr. and Mrs. C, not the house where they sat, is vexed by figures, noises, and knockings. We were sprinkled with water in the night, haunted by sounds of drums and horns, and so forth. Before a manifestation, we all felt a sudden chill, like either a wave of intensely cold air passing or a rapid decrease of temperature. This is a disgusting story if Mr. H.'s health was ruined by the presence at the performances. The point, however, is that he did behave in epileptic fashion while these events were in progress. It is natural to suppose that in his trances he may have been capable, unconsciously, of feats physically and morally impossible to him in his normal condition. This explanation would not cover all the alleged occurrences, but would account for many of them. We now take an ancient instance, similar to the disturbances in Newbury, New England, in 1679, similarly accompanied by the presence of an epileptic patient. The house of William Morse was strangely disquieted by a demon. The inmates were Morse, his wife, and their grandson, the boys whose age was not given. The trouble began on December 3rd with the sound of heavy objects falling on the roof. On December 8th, large stones and bricks were thrown in the west end of the house. The bedstead was lifted up from the floor, and the bedstaff flung out of the window, and a cat was hurled at the wife. A long staff danced up and down in the chimney. The man's wife put the staff in the fire, but she could not hold it there, inasmuch as it would be forcibly fly out of it. Yet after much ado, with joint strength, they made it burn. A chair flew about, and at last lighted on the table, where victuals stood ready to eat, and was likely to spoil all. Only by a nimble catching they saved some of their meat. A chest was removed from place to place, and with no hand touching it. two keys would fly about, making a loud noise by knocking against each other. As they lay in the bed, their little boy between them, a great stone on the floor was in the loft was thrown upon the man's stomach, and turning it down upon the floor, it was once more thrown up upon him. On January 23rd, 1680, his inkhorn was taken away from him while he was writing. He was keeping a diary of these events, and when all was seeking, he could not find it, and at last he saw it drop out of the air, down by the fire. February 2nd, while he and his boy were eating cheese, the pieces which were cut rested from them. But as for the boy, he was a great sufferer of these afflictions, for on the 18th of December, he, sitting by his grandfather, was hurried into great motions. The man made him stand between his legs, but the cherry danced up and down, and was like to have cast both man and boy into the fire, and the child was tossed about in such a manner as they had feared his brains would have been beaten out. All of these contortions of the boy were apparently what M. Charcot calls clownisms. When taken to the doctor's house, the boy was free of disturbances, which returned with his return home. He barked like a dog, clucked like a hen, talked nonsense about Powell, who pinched and bullied him. While he was in his bed with the old people, a pot with its contents were thrown upon them. While they clutched hands, like Mr. and Mrs. C, once a voice was heard singing, "Revenge, revenge is sweet." Finally, a mate of a ship came and declared that the grandmother was not rightly suspected of witch, and offered, if he were left alone with the boy, to cure him. The mate came next day betimes, and the boy was with him till night, since which time in his house Morthaith has not been molested with evil spirits. Probably the mate used the rope's end, and the boy was more speedily cured than Mr. H. Phenomena of these droll or buffooning rites, as Mr. Kirk says, and no man can doubt that the boy was at the bottom of the whole affair. But whether he was capable, when well or conscious, of other diversions, is another question. Children like him produced the famous witch mania in New England. We have here, undeniably, a well-recorded case, analogous to that of Mr. H. In modern case of bell-ringing, heavy thumps, and movement of objects, the agent was a young girl who had never been out to service before, and who passed the night in a state of wildly agitated somnambulism, repeated the whole service of the day. Mather gives several other examples in which motives or trickery are manifest, while we hear nothing of an apathetic or hysterical patient. In the majority of instances, ancient or modern, children are the agents. Thus we have psychical phenomena attained in a family circle, that of Mr. and Mrs. Davis with their children at Rio de Janeiro. The time was 1888. Curiosity has been caused by the notorious Henry Slade. There were touches and grasps of hands. A table ran after me, from Professor Alexander, and attempted to hem me in, when only C, a little girl, was in the room. As far as I could see, she did not even touch the table. The chair of Amy, aged 13 months, was moved about like that of a Master Morse 200 years earlier. The table jumped into the laps of the public. There were raps and thumps which seemed to shake the whole building. The lights floated about. A slate covered with flour was placed on C's lap. Her hands lay on the table. Marks of her fingers came on the flour, and, in answer to the mark of a naked baby foot. The present children were wearing laced boots, and were not told that little Amy was under the table. Bluish lights and the phantasm of a dog were seen. All of this answers to an ancient example of disturbances in Mr. Wesley's house in Epsworth, December 1715 to January 1716. The house was a new one, rebuilt in 1709. We have Samuel Wesley's journal, with many contemporary letters from members of the family and later reminiscences. There were many lively girls in the house, and 2 servants, a maid and a man, recently engaged. The disturbances began with groanings, then came knockings which flitted about the house. Mr. Wesley heard nothing till December 21st. The knocks replied to those made by the family, but they never could imitate the sounds. Mr. Wheely and Emily saw an object like a badger run from under the bed and vanish. The mastiff was much alarmed by the sounds. Mr. Wheely was thrice pushed by invisible power. The bogey was a Jacobite, as was Mrs. Wesley. Mr. Wesley was from King George. The knocks were violent when that usurper was prayed for. They did not try praying for King James. Robin, the servant, saw a handmill work violently. Not vexed me, but that it was empty. I thought it had been full of malt. He might have ground his heart out for me. But this was a joke-house, not an industrious devil. Robin called it Old Jeffreys, after a gentleman lately dead. The family called it Geoffrey, unless one name was merely misspelling. It seemed to sweep after Nancy Wesley when she swept the chambers. She thought he had done it for her and saved her the trouble. Mrs. Wesley concealed the letter from her husband, lest he should fancy it was against his own death. Letter of January 12th, 1716-17. This belief in noises foretelling death is very common. Compare Scott's nocturnal disturbances at Abbotsford and Bulwark, whose agents in building it and dying in London. The racket occurred on April 28th and 29th, 1818, and Scott examined the scene with Beardy's broadsword under my arm. Bullock died in Tenderton Street, London. Whether on April 28th or 29th is not easily ascertained. The noise resembled half a dozen men putting up boards and furniture. Nothing could be more certain that there was nobody on the premises at the time. The noises used to follow Hetty Wesley and thump her under her feet, and under those we see in Professor Alexander's narrative. Mr. Wesley's plate danced before him on the table a pretty while without anybody stirring the table. The disturbances quieted down in January, but recurred on March 31st. Similar phenomena had occurred long before in the family. The sound very often seemed in the air, in the middle of the room, nor could they ever make any such themselves with any contrivance. On February 16th, 1740, 23 years later, Emily writes to Jack about the wonderful thing called us Geoffrey. That something calls me against my extraordinary new affliction. Priestley styles this affair. The Beth authenticated that anywhere instant. He supposes that it might have been a trick for the servants for mere amusement. The modus operandi is difficult to explain. We hear nothing of bad health or hysterics in the household. For our purpose, it is enough to know that a few incidents of this kind, however produced, might originate and keep alive the belief in brownies, and that shrewd and knavish sprite called Robin Goodfellow, who frights the maidens of the villagery, skims milk, and sometimes labors on the quern. By a curious coincidence, we can show a case in which the phenomena of this kind is usually reported occurring at seances, and in examples of William Morris, were actually accepted as manifestations of the slab myth, or fairies. In his account of the disturbances in the Wesley family, Dr. Clark, the author, averred that he had himself witnessed similar events. It is thus he became to consult the Life, London, 1833. In the history of my own life, says Dr. Clark, I have related this matter in sufficient detail. Unluckily, in his life, page 76 to 77, he gives scarce any details. Previous to the sudden deaths in a family called Church, the phenomena of falling plates, heavy tread, and other noises occurred. Mr. Clark sat up one night in the kitchen and almost distinctly heard the noises above. He was born mystic, and even when a childhood a reader of Cornelius Agrippa, and later of the alchemists. But he recorded the instance of a woman who solemnly declared to Mrs. Clark that a number of the gentle people, Slamite, occasionally frequented her house, that they often conversed with her, one of them putting its hands on her eyes during the time, which hands she represented from the sensation she had, to be of the size of those of a child of 4 or 5 years of age. The family were worn down with these visits, and from the mention of touches and hands, it is pretty plain that we have to do with the kind of sprite whose paws people at seances. But these sprites are recognized, as seen in North of Ireland, as gentle people, folk of the peace. The amusing thing is that Mr. Clark, while he believes in Mr. Wesley's Jeffrey and the supernatural origin of a noise in the kitchen, laughs at similar phenomena when assigned to fairies. It is mere differences of terminology. Another old example may be given. It is Alexander Telfair's true relation of disturbances at Ringcroft in the parish of Redrick. The story is attested by the signatures of Ewart, ministers of Kells and Galway, Monteith, minister of Borg, Murdoch, minister of Crossmichael and Loch Ken, Spalding, minister at Parton, also by Loch Ken, Falconer, minister at Kelton, Mr. McLeland of Colleen, Lennox of Millhouse, and a number of farmers. These were all neighbors, and all attested that they saw and heard. Robert Chambers says, there never, perhaps, was any mystic history better attested. A few narrations of a kind have included occurrences and appearances which it was more difficult to reconcile with the theory of trick or imposture. Mr. Telfair himself had been chaplain in 1687 to Sir Thomas Kirkpatrick of Closeburn. He was then an Episcopalian. Andrew Mackey was a stonemason at Rarick. On March 7th, 1695, and for long after, stones began to fly about his house by night and day. The stones which hit any person had not half their natural weight. Mackey complained to Telfair, the minister, who entered the house and prayed. Nothing odd occurred. As he stood outside, he saw 2 little stones drop down on the croft, and then he was asked to return, and was pelted inside the cottage. This was March 11th. For a week there was no more trouble than the disturbances began again. Mr. Telfair was sent for, and was pelted, beaten with a staff, and heard loud knockings. That night I was in prayer, leaning upon the bedside. I felt something lifting up my arm. I, casting my eyes there, perceived a little white hand and arm of the elbow down, but presently vanished. There was never anything seen except that hand I saw, and the apparition of a boy in grey clothes. Sometimes the stoning went on in the open air. There were plenty of touchings, grippings, and scratchings. The door bar, a long heavy piece of squared wood, would go through the house as if a person were carrying it in their hand, yet nothing seen doing it. Here we compare in Proc. SPR, February 1892, the story of the carpenter's shop in Swanland, in Yorkshire, where pieces of wood were levitated into abnormal flight. No imposture was discovered, nor was the presence of any one person necessary. The ministers of Kells and Crossmichael were pelted with stones of 8 pounds weight. On April 6th, a fireball was floated through the cottage. When 5 ministers were present, it made all the house shake, break a hole through the thatch, and poured in great stones. They handed the legs of some as a man's hand. They hoisted Mr. Telfair, Lennox of Millhouse, and others off the ground. A sieve flew through the house. Mackey caught it, and a force gripped it and pulled the interior apart from the rim. A day of humiliation was solemnly kept in the parish, which only excited the emulsion of the disturbing agent. It continued in a most fearful manner without intermission. Voices were heard, which talked nonsense of a semi-scriptural kind. Finally, the thing died out in the early of May. By the way, on April 28th, it pulled down the end of the house, all the stonework thereof. This is a very odd case, as no suspicion is thrown on the children. The attestations of several witnesses are given, not only at the close, but at almost every separate incident. The vision of the white hand is agreeable. The Devil of Glenluce, Galloway, was published by Sinclair in his Hydrostatics, of all places, in 1672, and again in Satan's Invisible World, and by Glenville in Sedemicus Triumphatus. In this affair, a boy called Thomas, the son of an unlucky householder, was clearly the agent. The phenomena were stone-throwing, beating with sticks, levitation of a plate, and a great deal of voices, possibly uttered, the source said Thomas. The Synod ordered a day of humiliation, 1655 to 56. The affair of the drummer of Tedworth, 1661, is, or ought to be, too well known for quotation. The troubles began when Mr. Mompesson seized the drum of a vagrant musician. In the presence of a clergyman, chairs walked about the room themselves. A bedstaff was thrown at the minister, and so favorably that a lock of wool could not have fallen more softly. The children, as usual, were especially haunted. The jingling of money was common, it is also as Epworth. Lights wandered about the house, blue and glimmering. The noise was persistent in the woodwork of the children's beds while their hands were outside. The knocks answered knocks made by visitors. There were drivers and other marvels. The drummer was suspected, but, consciously or not, the children were probably the agents. They seemed to have been at their usual health. Galashel's, date not given, a loud knock on the floor, accompanied by a hystero-epileptic girl wherever she sat. In bed, her body was so lifted up that many strong men were not able to keep it down. The minister, who could not make anything of her, was Mr. Wilkie. The girl was Margaret Wilson. Sinclair, page 200. This little parcel of strange stories may suffice to show that the part of the fairy belief is based on such incidents as still occur, or are reported to occur, just in the old fashion. It is for the psychologists and physicians to ascertain how far, if at all, the incidents are produced by hysterical or epileptic or somnambulistic patients. Common Fort Worth trickery is usually detected in paid mediums. If the trickery simulates real events, or continues an old traditional form of imposture, the moral that parents should not allow their children to be present at seances hardly needs enforcing. Some of them may escape unharmed, but frightful injuries may be inflicted on the health and on character. 6. Second sight and telepathy. We've already hinted that events of an ordinary kind, illusions, cases of mistaken identity, or hallucinations, are probably groundwork for part of the Highland belief in second sight. Of course, if a certain portion of the hallucinations were, or could be taken for veridical, attention would be given to these alone, and others would be neglected. And the Psychical Society has collected and examined hundreds of these cases in modern life. The Society may find out, experimentally, whether second sight can be acquired by this manner described by Mr. Kirk, whether by the hair tether, or merely putting a foot under that of the seer. Thus, contact is used from thought reading, as in second sight, the seer by contact communicates his hallucination. Second sight itself is now called telepathy, which, however, does not essentially advance our knowledge of the subject. It is either very common, or people who choose to claim possession of it are very common. In our society, it is mere matter for idle tales. In the Highlands, the second sight was a belief and a system. Mr. Pepys and Dr. Johnson investigated the matter, and Dr. Johnson came away open to conviction, but unconvinced. The Psychical Society is now examining second sight in the Highlands. It is interesting to learn that a Presbyterian seers justified their visions out of the Bible, which also justified the burning of these gifted men on occasion. Mr. Kirk is tolerant enough to ascribe the visions as a bounty of providence. This may be passed north of the Highland pine, but in Fife and the south, the seers will be speedily have been accommodated with a stake and tar barrel. The writings of Woodrow and Mr. Robert Blair of St. Andrews, 1650 to 1660, prove that the savory preacher wrought marvels. He was inspired, but if an amateur did the very same things, prophesied, heals disease, and so forth, he or she was likely to be healed by the presbytery and possibly dragged to the stake. In the Highlands, these invidious distinctions were less forcibly drawn. Mr. Kirk treats the whole question in his curiosity, cold, scientific ways. If these things occur, they are in the realm of nature, and are results of cases which may be verily conjectured. They may be provincial, or sport of evolution derived from a complexional quality of the first acquirer, which often becomes hereditary in his lineage. Lord Tarbot's letter to the inquirer, Robert Boyle, was added by Mr. Kirk to this little treatise with his own annotations. His belief that the fairy sights could only be seen while the eyes were kept steady without twinkling is attested to the well-known anecdote. On the afternoon of Culloden, a little girl staying with Lord Lovat of Gortleg was reading in a window seat. Chancing to look out, she saw the company of headlong riders hastening to the castle. Believing them to be the Slaymyth, she tried hard to keep her eyes from twinkling, that she might not lose the vision. But these, alas, were no fairies. They were Prince Charles and his men flying from the victorious English. The tale proves that the belief long survived in the day of the Minister of Aberfoyle. Lord Tarbot mentions also the vision in the shroud on the breast of a man about to die, which seems to be alluded to in the prophecy of Thecmoclus in the Odyssey. Lord Tarbot's tales are in the familiar kind. There are dozens of such smothly in some place. Mr. Kirk's notes are chiefly remarkable with a citation of Walter Graham's Evil Eye, which killed what he praised. A worldwide superstition, too common to need supporting by foreign and classical examples. Unluckily, at this point, Mr. Kirk abandons what we may call his scientific attitude. He has accounted for his supernatural affairs as not supernatural at all, but phenomena in nature, and subject, like other phenomena, to laws. But now it occurs to him to explain the conduct of the Slaymyth as the result of missionary zeal on their part. They endeavor to convince us of a deity. Though on the face of his arguments, the co-walker no more proves a deity than does ordinary walker. He may have been reading learned Dr. Moore the Platonist, and may have altered his ideas. His account of the girl who learned, or rather composed, a long poem by aid of nimble and acrisious sprites, afforded an early example of what is called an inspirational medium. It is unlucky that Mr. Kirk did not publish this work, of which he had a copy. The ordinary spirit poetry may be written, as Dr. Johnson said of a sitting, by anyone who would abandon his mind to it. Mr. Kirk maintains that the Neolithic arrowheads could not have been executed by the art of men. He relapses from his usual old common sense. He also believes in men who are magically shot-proof, like Claverhouse, who had to be shot by a silver bullet, like Archbishop Sharp, who thought his pious assassins erroneously held at their bullets to no effect, and like certain soldiers mentioned in Double Fidelity of Dumruth Racket. This absurd belief was very generally held by the Covenanters, where his local superstitions and those of his generation are not concerned. Mr. Kirk recovers his clearness of intellect. In Purgatory, he only finds a pre-Christian Hades, our secret republic with an ecclesiastical coloring, additional fictions of monks doting in their crazy heads. Mr. Kirk did not perceive the danger in his own argument. If the Highland second-sighted man answers to a Hebrew prophet in his visions and trances, the Hebrew prophet is in danger of being no more considered than a Highland second-sighted man. However, it is to Mr. Kirk's praise that he shows no persecuting disposition as far as witches are concerned, though he has seen them pricked, and that he argues very fairly that his premises and within his limits. He recognizes the unity of the spiritual phenomena and the popular beliefs, whether it springs from a common wellhead of delusion in their nature, or whether it really has a source in the observation of peculiar and rather rare phenomena. The Edinburgh edition of 1815, probably the only one, the editor added the work of Tephophius and Selinus in Second Sight. This is not rare nor expensive, and we do not reproduce it. One case of telepathy may be quoted from the Theophilus. Donald Beaton, resident of Hammer, related that, in his passage from Glasgow to the Isle of Skye, he stopped at Tipperary, a known harbour in the Isle of Mull. Here someone gave him a loin of venison. Donald, of whose wife and mother was a seer, to try her powers, wished at the piece of venison in her hands. The same night the seer, who lived with her daughter and his wife, apprehended that she saw him enter the house with a shapeless lump in his hands. She knew not what, but resembled flesh, which gave herself and her daughter great joy, as they despaired of him by his long absence. This is telepathy, if telepathy there be. Another picturesque tale shows us how, on the night before the rout of Moy, Patrick McCaskill met the famed Rhiannon, MacLeod's piper in the town of Inverness, and saw him contracted to a sizable boy of 5 or 6, and expand again to his athletic proportions. When Rhiannon was killed at the rout of Moy, in attempts to surprise and seize Prince Charles, before leaving Skye, he had prophesied, MacLeod will come back, but Rhiannon shall never. The editor is acquainted with the splendid case of second sight in Kensington. The seer was an accomplished English gentleman, and mentioned his vision at the moment to a witness who remembers and corroborates his statement. Thus, the Hebrides and the Highlands have no monopoly on second sight. The researchers M. Charcot, M. Richett, and other psychologists do not at present help us much in the matter of vertical second sight. It is not a hallucination suggested by a hypnotized subject, but an impression produced by a remote person or event on the subject who has not been hypnotized at all. For example, Dr. Adam Clark, in his Life, Volume 2, page 16, tells us of Tracy Clark, who, being in the Isle of Man with his son, dreamed that he had visited his wife in Liverpool. He told his son that Mrs. Clark was looking very well, but, contrary to her habit, was sleeping in the best bedroom. On the day when Mr. Clark said this, Mrs. Clark, who had been sleeping in her best bedroom, told the little son to lay in her room, that she had heard his father ride up to the door, stable his horse, open the door, and come upstairs, and walk around her bed, but that she could not see him. This is a case at least of second hearing, as it has no hypnotic explanation. We end in the candid spirit of Dr. Johnson as far as the poltergeist and second sight are concerned, willing to be convinced, but far indeed from conviction. As to the fairy belief, we conceive it to be a complex matter, from which tradition, with its memory of earth-dwellers, is not wholly absent, while more is due to survival in the pre-Christian Hades, and to the beliefs of the local spirits, the Voice de Melanesia, the Netherites of ancient and modern Greece, the Lairs of Rome, and the fateful marrow of Hathors, old imaginings of a world not yet depeopled of its dreams. I did almost half the book. Now I'll get into the actual stuff by Kirk. An essay of the nature and actions of the subterranean and of the most part invisible people heretofore under the name of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies, or the like, among the Low Country Scots, as they are described by those who have second sight, and now, to occasion further inquiry, collected and compared by a circumspect inquirer residing among the Scotch, Irish, and Scotland. Chapter 1 of the Subterranean Inhabitants. These seas, or fairies, they call the Slaymaith, are the good people, it would seem, to prevent the dint of their ill attempts, for the Irish, oof the beliefs of they fear harm of, are said to be the middle nature betwixt man and angel, as were demons thought to be of old, of intelligent, studious spirits, and light changeable bodies, like those called astral, somewhat of the nature of confined cloud, and have been and best seen in twilight. These bodies be so pliable through the subtlety of the spirits that agitate them, that they can make themselves appear or disappear at pleasure. Some have bodies or vehicles so spongious, thin, and just that they are fed only by sucking into some fine spirituous liquors that pierce like pure air and oil. Others feel more gross on the foilfun, and substance of the corns and liquors, and corn it fell that grows on the surface of the earth, which the fairies steal away, partly invisible, partly preying on the grain, as do crows and mice. Wherefore in this same age there is sometimes heard to bake bread, strike hammers, and do such like services within the little hillocks they oft mountain, they most haunt. They most haunt. Some whereof of old, before the God-spell dispelled paganism, and in some barbarous places as yet, enter houses after all are at rest, and set the kitchens in order, and cleansing all their vessels. Such drags go under the name of brownies. When we have plenty, they have scarcity in their homes, and on the contrary, where they are empowered to catch on such prey everywhere as they please, their robberies notwithstanding some times off occasion great rickles of corn, and do not bleed so well, as they call it, or prove so copious by very far as we expect of the owner. Their bodies are congealed air of some form, sometimes so carried aloft, others will grovel different shapes, and enter into any cranny or cleft of the earth where air enters to their ordinary dwellings. The earth being full of cavities and cells, and there being no place nor creature that is supported to have other animals, greater or lesser, living in or upon it as the inhabitants, and no such thing as pure wilderness in the whole universe. 2. When we, the more terrestrial kind, have so numerously planted in all countries, do labor that the abstruse people, as well as ourselves, albeit when several countries were uninhabited by the we, these had their early tillage above the ground, as we now. The whole of those fairest do yet examine, yet remain to be seen on the shoulders of the very high hills, which was done when the champion ground was wood and forest. They removed to other lodgings at the beginning of each quarter of the year, so traveling until doomsday, being impudent and impotent of, staying in one place and finding some safe by forewarning journeying, and changing in habitations. Their chameleon-like bodies swim in the air near the earth with bag and baggage, and at such revelations at times, seers or men of the second sight, females being seldom so qualified, have very terrifying encounters with them, even on highways, who therefore usually shown to travel abroad at these four seasons of the year, and thereby made it custom to this day among the Scottish Irish to keep church duly every first Sunday on the quarter, to feed or hollow themselves their corns and cattle from the shoots and stealth of these wandering tribes. And many of these superstitious people will not be seen in church again until the next quarter begin, as if no duty were to be learned or done by them, but all this use of worship and sermons were to save them from these arrows that fly in the dark. They are distributed in tribes and orders, and have children, nurses, marriages and deaths and burials, in appearance even as we, unless they do so for a mock throw. For the prognosticates some such things among us. 3. They are clearly seen by these men of the second sight to eat at funerals and banquets, hence many of the Scotch Irish have not treats meat at these meetings, left they have communing with, or be postponed by them. So they're seen to carry the bier or coffin with the corpse among the Middle Earth men to the grave. Some men of that exalted sight, whether by art or nature, have told me that they have seen these meetings a doubleman, or shape of some man in two places. That is, a superterranean and a subterranean inhabitant, perfectly resembling one another of the points, whom he notwithstanding could easily distinguish one from another by some secret tokens or operations, and so go speak to a man his neighbor and familiar, passing by the apparition or resemblance of it. They avouch that every element in being state of being has animals resembling these of another element, and by these fishes sometimes the sea resembling monks of the late order in all their hoods and dresses. So as the Roman invention of good and bad demons and angels and guardian angel was particularly assigned is them by the ignorance mistake, sprung only from this original. They call it Reflex Man, a co-worker, in every way like the man as a twin brother and companion, haunting him as a shadow, as is oft seen and known among men, resembling the original, both before and after the original is dead. We also seen the old enter the house, by which the people knew that the person of the likeness was to visit them within a few days. This copy, echo, or living picture goes at last to his own herd. He accompanied that person so long and frequently for ends best known in the self, whether to guard him from the secret assaults or some of his own folks, or only as some powerful ape and counterfeit with all his actions. However, the stories of old witches proves beyond contradiction that all sorts of people, spirits which assume light, airy bodies, or crazed bodies acted by soaring spirits, seem to have some pleasure, at least to average the pain or melancholy, by frisking and caparizing the satyrs, or whistling and screeching, unlike lucky birds, in their unhallowed synagogues and sabbaths. If invited and earnestly required, these companions make themselves known and familiar to men. Otherwise, being in a different state and element, they neither can nor will easily converse with them. They avouch that a hello or a great eater hath a voracious elf to be his attender, called a joint eater, just haver, feeding on the pith or counterfeits of that quintessence of what the man eats, and that therefore he continues lean like a hawk or heron, notwithstanding his devouring appetites. Yet it would seem that they convey that the substance elsewhere, for these subterraneans eat but little in their dwellings, their food being exactly clean, and fevered up by the pleasant children like enchanted puppets. What food they extract from us is conveyed to their homes by secret paths, as some skilful women do in the pith and milk from neighbors' cows into their own cheese-like hold thorough in the hair tedder at a great distance by Arab magic, or by drawing a spigot fastened to a post, which will bring milk as far as the bowl will be heard to roar. Cheese made of the remaining milk of a cow, thus stained, will swim in water like a cork. The method they take to recover their milk is bitter chiding of the suspected enchanters, charging them with a counter charm to give them back their own, and God, and their mother's and their master's name. But a little of the mother's dung stroketh on the cow's mouth before it suckany does prevent this theft. 4. Their houses are large and fair, and, unless at some odd occasions, unperceivable by vulgar eyes, like Reichland and other enchanted islands, having for lights continual lamps and fires, often seen without fuel to sustain them. Women are yet alive who tell they are taken away when the childbed to nurse fairy children, a lingering voraciousness image in them, being left in their place, like the reflection in a mirror, which, as it were some insatiable spirit is one assumed body, made first semblance to devour the meats of the cunning carried by, and then left in carafes, as if when expired or departed, thence by a natural and common death. The child and fire, with flood and other necessities, are set before the nurse how soon she enters, but she neither perceives any passage out, nor feels that the people do in other rooms in the lodging. When the child is weaned, the nurse dies or is conveyed back, and gets to, by her choice, to stay there. But if any superterraneans be so subtle to the practice flights of procuring the privacy to any of their mysteries, such as making use of their ointments, which is Gangrel's ring takes them into invisible or nimble, and casts them into a trance, or alters their shape, or makes things appear as vast distance, and etc., they smite them without pain, as with a puff of wind, and bereave them both the natural and acquired sights of a twinkling of an eye. Both these sights were once to come, being from the same organ and inseparable, or they strick them dumb. The Tramontans in this day of bread and Bible, or a piece of iron in women's beds when travelling, to save them from their being thus stolen, and they commonly report that all uncouth, unknown whites are terrified by nothing earthly so much as by cold iron. They deliver the reason to be that hell lying betwixt the chill tempest and the firebrands of scalding metals, and iron of the north, hence the lodestone causes a tendency to that point. And by an apathy thereto, these odious Farsang's creatures shrug and frights all that place hence relating to the abhorred place, relating to so abhorred a place, whence their torment is either begun or feared to come thereafter. 5. Their apparel and speech is like that of the people and country under which they live. So they are seen to wear plaids and various garments in the Highlands of Scotland, and Sucknocks therefore in Ireland. They speak but little, and by that of the whistling clear and rough. The very devils conjured by the country do answer to the language of the place, yet sometimes the subterraneans speak more distinctly than any other times. The women are said to be spine and fine, to dye and toff, and to embroider, but whether it is as usual operation their substantial refined stuffs with apt and solid instruments, or only curious cobwebs and palpable rainbows, and fantastic imitation of the actions more terrestrial mortals, since it is transcended all the senses of the seer to discern whether I leave the conjecture as I found it. Oh. If anyone is wondering why I'm having trouble reading this, it is because the text is written with a long S. The long S looks like an F. Ads are coming up, and I definitely need to get a drink. I feel like I should translate this one. Because I can read it, just not well. But I sure cannot read it quickly. So, we will go ahead and take a break and see how much more of this book I can do. Okay, we're back. And I hadn't even thought about the fact I've been doing this for about 2 hours. Also, look at those cats. Just freaking adorable. Hard to think that Tabby is 9 years old, and the big ball of fluff is almost 6. Anyway. Let's get a little bit more of this red. Again, if you ever wonder why I'm having some trouble pronouncing these things, it's because I'm not used to reading the long S, and it is used a lot in this. And again, the long S looks like an F, so if you hear me stumbling, that's why. 6. 3 men travel much abroad, either prefaced or gaping the dismal, and tragically actions of some amongst us, and have also many disastrous doings of their own, and convocations, fighting, gashes, wounds, and burials, both in the earth and air. They live much longer than we, yet die at last, or at least vanish from the state. Then with their tenants, that nothing perseth, but as a sun and year, everything goes in a circle, lesser or greater, and is renewed, refreshed by its revolutions. It is another that every body in creation moves, which is a sort of life, and that nothing moves but has another animal moving on it, and so on, for the utmost minutest corpuscle that's available in the receptacle of life. 7. They are said to have aristocratical rulers and laws, but no discernible religion, love, or devotion towards God, the blessed Maker of all. They disappear whenever they hear his name invoked, or the name of Jesus, at which all do bow willingly, or by constraint, that dwell above and beneath within the earth. 2:10. Nor can they act aught the time after hearing that sacred name. The tabhavasir, or seer, that corresponds with a kind of familiars, can bring them a spell to appear with himself, or others when he pleases, as readily as and/or witch of those of their kind. And/or witch? And/or witch. Yes, it's spelled like it sounds. He tells they're ever readiest to go on hurtful errands, and seldom will be in the messengers of a great good to men. He is not terrified at their sight when he calls them, but seeing them in a surprise, as he often does, frights him extremely. That's supposed to be a surprise, because that's actually an F. Where is it? No, it's not. Surprise. Okay. And glad would he be quite of such, for the hideous spectacles seen among them, as the torturing of some whites, earnest ghosts and staring looks, skirmishes and the like, they do not at all the harm which apparently they have power to do, nor are they perceived to be in great pain, save that they are unusually silent and sullen. They are said to have many pleasant toyish books, but the operation of these pieces only appears in some paroxysms and antic of corporeality and jollity, as if ravished and prompted by a new spirit entering into them at an instant, lighter and merrier than their own. Other books they have involved abstruse sense, like which the Roserkian or Sicarian style. They have nothing of the Bible, save the collected parcels of charms and counter-charms, not to defend themselves withal, but to operate on other animals, for they are a people invulnerable to wire weapons, and albeit werewolves and witches, or true bodies, are, by the union of the spirit of nature that runs through us all, echoing and doubling the blow towards another, wounded at home when the astral-assumed bodies are stricken elsewhere, as the strings of a second harp tuned to one union. Sounds, though, only one can be struck, yet these people are not to be second or so gross a body at all as to be so pierced, but as air which, when divided against itself, divided units again, or if they feel pain by a blow, they are better physicians than we, and quickly cure it. They are not subject to sore sickness, but dwindle and decay to a certain period, all about the same age. Some say their continual sadness is because of their pendulous state, like those men, Luke 13:2-6. As uncertain what's that the last revolution will become of them, when they are locked up into an unchangeable condition, and if they have any frolic fits of mirth, 'tis the constrained grinning of the morted, or rather is acted on a stage, and moved by another than their own, cordially coming of themselves. But other men of the second sight, being illiterate and unwary of the observations, learn from those, one averring those subterranean people be the departed souls attending in while superior state, and clothed with bodies procured throughout their homesteads and the life, food, active, ethereal vehicles to hold them, that they may neither scatter or wander, and be lost in the totem, and their first nothing. But if any were so impious to have given no alms, they say when the souls of such do depart, they sleep in the unactive state until they resume the terrestrial bodies again. Others, that what the Low Country Scots call the wreath, and the Irish tabanshee, or death's messenger, appearing for sometimes as a little rough dog, if costs and conjured in time, will be pacified by the death of any other creature instead of the sick man. It is only envious fumes of the man approaching death, exhaled and congealed into various lightness, as ships and armies are sometimes apt to shape, sometimes shaped in the air, and called astral bodies, agitated with wildfire with wind, and are neither souls or counterfeiting spirits. Yet not a few avouch, as is said, that Cyrillicles are numerous peoples by themselves having their own policies, which diversities in judgments may occasion several inconsistencies, and this reherfall after narrowest scrutiny made about it. Okay, yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to translate this book out later. I will try to read this after translating it. But, yeah. Let's see if I can find some to read. My background music's acting up again. If anyone has any raid suggestions, feel free to shout it out. But I'm definitely going to have to either translate myself or find one in, I guess I'll say, more standardized English. Did I get, or I can read it. Oh, now the background music comes on. So would we want to go to more reading? Or go and harass a Fey Knight? Yeah, let's harass a Fey Knight. I will hopefully see you all. Did I actually type it wrong? But yeah, I hope I will see everyone tomorrow when we get into the next book of fairy tales. Have a good night, everyone.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist, lurking in the silence where the echoes softly play. The echoes of forgotten tales, dimming as they sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting gold. Lands of frost and twilight, secrets yet untold. The forest breeze a shiver, its ancient heartbeats thrum. Underneath the silver glow, the wild whispers come. Time to close the book, let the pages fall. You've roamed the winding paths, now heed the twilight call. The moon is setting low, a guardian in the sky. Time to dim the lights, let the worldly worries die. Into dreams we go, where shadows softly play. Embrace the gentle darkness, let it guide your way. Whispers curl like smoke,